I'm now going to discuss the different types of barriers that are on offer in different capital at risk structured products. So this is the level at which the underlying measurement, the underlying index can fall before you are likely to give rise to a loss of capital. Now, the most common type in the market at the moment, and arguably the most favourite type, is an end of term barrier. This is also referred to as a European barrier, but let's not get too technical. Now, as the name suggests, the barrier is only observed at the end of the term of the investment period. And so it doesn't matter where the index might go to during the investment period, as long as it's above the barrier at the end of the term, the contract is designed to at least return your capital. Obviously, we're hoping it's going to be higher and it's going to give you a gain. Now, you might also have an intra-term barrier. This means that that barrier could be breached during the term of the investment. So let's call it a 50% intra-term barrier. The FTSE 100 index at the end of the investment term could end up 10% lower, but because it had broken through 50% barrier during the term, then ultimately it means your barrier is being breached, your index is lower at the end, and therefore the contract might give rise to a 10% loss. Now, that observation of that intra-term barrier is also quite crucial, because it might be, for example, only observed at the end of each year. Now, that's almost as good as an end of term barrier, certainly not as good, or it might be observed only once a quarter, or it might be observed at close of business on every day, a full term daily close barrier. If it is, however, observed throughout the term, every 1 second position, i.e. it's an intraday barrier, it means that whatever the low of that index was during the investment term, that dictates whether your barrier is being breached. So if I've got two contracts, and one of them has a full term daily closed barrier, and one of them has an end of term barrier, and the closing level of the index on the worst day during that 5-year period was 60% lower, and at the end it ends up 25% lower, then because the full term daily closed barrier was breached, then that contract is going to give rise to a loss. Let's assume it's a 1-for-1 loss, so the contract will give rise to a 25% loss. However, for the end of term barrier, it makes no difference what happened during the term, and so you wouldn't suffer a loss under those contracts. Now, if you have a contract that's linked to two indices, it's very often the worst performing of those two indices that counts. So you might have one index that falls by 50%, and yet the other one only falls by 30%. It's the worst performing index that counts. And it's often the worst performing index that counts as to whether a barrier has been breached, and then the worst performing over the term that dictates as to whether there is actually a capital reduction.